The Edmund Fitzgerald broke apart and sank last night on Lake Superior. The ship and its 29-man crew disappeared in a storm with 80 miles per hour winds and waves up to 25 feet high. On the night of November 10, 1975, the biggest ship on the Great Lakes vanished without a trace. The Edmund Fitzgerald, called unsinkable, went down with all 29 men on board. No emergency call, no survivors. Only broken lifeboats and scattered pieces left floating on the stormy water. For 50 years, we've been told the storm alone caused this disaster. But what if that isn't true? What if the real reason for this tragedy was kept secret from us? What if Edmund Fitzgerald didn't sink the way we were told? The truth will shock you. Pride of the American side, the Edmund Fitzgerald was no ordinary ship. At 729 feet long and weighing over 13,600 tons, it was bigger than almost every boat on the Great Lakes when it first hit the water in 1958. It was the largest of its kind, and its huge size amazed everyone. But the Fitzgerald was more than just steel and metal parts. It was called the Pride of the American Side, a moving monument to a time when American business was booming and the United States needed ships like this to move iron ore that powered factories and built cities. When it sailed, crowds came just to watch it go by. The Fitzgerald moved through the Sulaks like a sea monster, and under Captain Peter Poole, it even had its own personality. Poolcare famously played music from the ship's speakers, filling the air with jazz or rock as she passed by. It was an unusual thing for a working cargo ship, but it gave the Fitzgerald an identity, something people remembered and talked about long after she disappeared from view. Her reputation wasn't built just on being different. She was a hard worker, carrying record-breaking loads of taconite pellets across the inland seas while keeping a perfect safety record. She was fast, reliable, and seemed totally indestructible. To shipping companies and regular people, the Fitzgerald wasn't just another cargo ship, but a floating symbol of progress, a promise that American steel would continue to rule the world. Some even believed she would serve proudly into the next century. But behind the image of pride and strength, problems began to show up. Small cracks in her steel, maintenance that should have been done right away was pushed aside. Repairs that engineers said were needed were delayed to avoid slowing down shipping schedules. The business culture of that time was ruthless, where deadlines, tonnage, and profits mattered more than safety. As the years went by, Fitzgerald carried her fame with quiet dignity. But she also carried the burden of being ignored. For almost 20 years, she had been celebrated as unsinkable. By November of 1975, that fantasy was about to crumble. The final voyage begins. The final voyage of the Edmund Fitzgerald began on the cold afternoon of November 9, 1975, at the Burlington Northern Railroad Dock No. 1 in Superior, Wisconsin. The ship was loaded with 26,116 long tons of taconite pellets, small, marble-like balls of processed iron ore that shined with the promise of industry. Fitzgerald had carried loads like this countless times before, but this trip would turn out to be completely different. At exactly 2:30 p.m., Captain Ernest M. McSorley gave the order, and the great cargo ship pulled away from the dock, its front cutting into the steel-gray waters of Lake Superior. The air was already sharp with the edge of a coming storm, the kind that sailors on the Great Lakes both respected and feared. November storms were legendary here, and their fury had destroyed hundreds of ships in the past. Still, for McSorley, an experienced captain close to retirement, this was routine. Not far behind, the Arthur M. Anderson left from Two Harbors, Minnesota, commanded by Captain Bernie Cooper. McSorley and Cooper kept constant radio contact, their ships connected by the invisible bond of shared purpose and mutual caution. Being the faster of the two, rushed ahead, while the Anderson kept a measured distance of 10 to 15 miles. Together, the captains agreed on their route, the northern passage along the Canadian shore, where the highlands offered some protection from the storm that was sweeping in from the Great Plains. At first, the voyage seemed normal. The Fitzgerald, massive yet graceful, pushed forward through waves that were still manageable, its engines humming with steady power. The Anderson followed, its crew watching the distant outline of the great ship leading the way. For those on both ships, this was simply another run, another routine crossing of the inland sea dot. But Lake Superior is a tricky expanse. Its waters hold stories of calm mornings that turned into chaotic afternoons, of ships swallowed whole without warning. That November, the storm was building strength with every hour. feeding on cold air and pressure systems until it transformed into something monstrous. The men on both ships had faced storms before, but this one was different. What began as a routine voyage was about to turn into one of the most haunting sea tragedies in American history. Into the storm. By the evening of November 9, 1975, the entire expanse of Lake Superior was under gale warnings. The air itself seemed alive with danger. The screaming winds tearing through the rigging of both ships until every line and cable vibrated like the strings of an angry instrument. Wind gusts climbed past 50 knots, each one carrying a force that rattled the pilothouse windows and made the deck shake. Seas rose with the wind, swelling into walls of water 12 to 16 feet high, their tops breaking white against the endless black. These conditions were difficult, but still within the known limits of what Great Lakes sailors had survived for. Generations. Storm warnings replaced gale warnings overnight, marking the storm's shift into something more vicious. The morning of November 10th dawned without warmth or mercy. Lake Superior was no longer water, but a battlefield. A vast plain of steel-gray mountains surging against the sky, each wave hunting for a weakness in the iron hulls that fought to cross it. For men like Captain Ernest McSorley of the Edmund Fitzgerald and Captain Bernie Cooper of the Arthur M. Anderson, this was not their first encounter with Superior's fury. Both were seasoned captains, men toughened by years of navigating waters where storms could rise as suddenly as lightning. They pressed on with the grim determination of professionals who had seen bad weather before, who trusted their skill and the steel of their ships. Yet this storm had a character that set it apart. It shifted its power and its direction, backing into the northwest by early afternoon. With that turn, the fetch of the lake lengthened, giving the wind an uninterrupted path to raise even larger seas. Soon, the waves climbed past 20 feet, each crest rolling like a moving mountain. The Edmund Fitzgerald was built for strength, her size and power making her the pride of the Great Lakes fleet. But on that day, even the pride of the American side found itself tested against forces far greater than any man-made engineering. The storm gathered strength upon strength, and with every mile, the armor of the Fitzgerald was pushed closer to its breaking point. It was only a matter of time before the first cracks would show, the shoal that changed everything. By the early afternoon of November 10th, Fitzgerald's course carried her near Caribou Island, a lonely, rugged place that guarded one of the lake's most dangerous hazards. Captain Cooper of Anderson, watching his radar, noticed something that made his stomach sink. The Fitzgerald, running ahead in the storm, appeared to pass directly over 6-fathom shoal. This was no ordinary patch of shallow water. It was infamous among sailors, a place where the lake's bottom rose up suddenly and dangerously, waiting for the slightest error in navigation to punish a ship with grounding. Later, in testimony given under oath, Cooper and his officers were unshakable in their memory. To their eyes, the Fitzgerald had crossed directly over the shoal. No alarms were raised at the time. No cries of distress carried across the radio waves, but Cooper understood the risk. If McSorley's ship had indeed struck bottom, the danger was invisible. Lurking beneath the surface in a way no one aboard could immediately see, if the keel of the Fitzgerald scraped against the rocky floor, the blow could have been devastating. Steel plates might have buckled, rivets might have loosened, and seams that had held against decades of weather could have been forced apart. Even a small breach, invisible in the chaos of the storm, might have allowed water to begin seeping into the holds. The storm raging overhead would have shown no mercy to a wounded ship. With waves now climbing above 20 feet and winds screaming past 60 knots, any hidden weakness in the hull would have been exploited ruthlessly by the lake. Water could have poured in with each roll, slowly dragging the great cargo ship down, even as her crew fought to keep her afloat. This moment near Caribou Island may have been the true beginning of the end. Fitzgerald, still outwardly steady, may already have been carrying unseen wounds that doomed her long before the last distress calls were ever sent. Signs of distress. At 3:30 p.m., McSorley radioed Anderson with troubling news. A fence rail was down. 2 vents were lost or damaged. The ship had developed a list. Both pumps were running. The Fitzgerald was still afloat, still moving forward, but no longer untouched. She was struggling. The words carried far heavier weight than their brevity suggested. On the Fitzgerald, conditions had shifted from challenging to critical. The loss of vents meant that water could more easily find its way below decks. The damaged rail was a sign of punishment from the waves, proof thaw.